Howdy, folks. Today we're asking a big question. After 25 years of Photoshop, what still matters? With artificial intelligence, automated masking, generative fill, and one-click editing tools changing the way photographers work, do we still need to understand the fundamentals? Or is Photoshop becoming a piece of software that increasingly does the thinking for us? Well, we'll find out right after this. Welcome to the Camera podcast, where we explore the art, craft, and business of photography. Before we get started, I'd like to thank the members of the Camera Photography Podcast community who support the show through Buy Me a Coffee. If you like to help support future episodes, you'll find the link at buymeacoffee.com/CameraShake. You could also check out the Camera merchandise store for t-shirts, hoodies, mugs, and more. And, who doesn't need a Camera podcast mug? Obviously, if you drink coffee, you need a mug. It makes sense, you know it. Make sure you sign up for the Camera mailing list at camerashakepodcast.com. Links for everything are, as always, in the description. So, without further ado, let's welcome today's special guest, the founder of PhotoshopCAFE and one of the most established Photoshop educators in the world. Award-winning digital artist, photographer, author, and educator, he has helped millions of creatives navigate the transition from traditional image editing to digital photography, online education, YouTube, and now, of course, generative AI. Give it up for none other than Mr. Colin Smith. Colin, man, how's it going?
Hey, it's going great. Great to see you. And I decided to wear my hat and glasses in honor of you, so I could, kind of be the low budget you today.
Hey, man, that's, I take that as a compliment. Absolutely. Cool. Somebody who can match my obsession with hats. I love it.
Well, as I lose my hair, I love hats more.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny this, my obsession with hats really started when the weather here got hotter, because we're in the middle of the third heat wave this year over here in the UK.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
And, some people might think, the UK and heat wave, what if the sun comes down, there's blue sky, it's probably called a heat wave. But it really, really, really has been hot here. I mean, temperature now is in the 90s. It was as hot as like 100 Fahrenheit, which, the UK is unfortunately not prepared for that kind of thing. But here we are.
Yeah. So unfortunate. Yeah, I feel for you guys over there. All of Europe there with that heat dome.
Yeah. Now, after more than 25 years of working with Photoshop, what part of the software still genuinely excites you?
Which part of it still excites me?
Mm-hmm.
This is probably going to surprise you. All of it. I still love it. It's funny because I posted that on Twitter a couple of years ago, because I just remember one day I just opened up Photoshop and I was like, wow, I'm just as excited about this as I was, when I first opened it, because it's just the endless possibilities. And I'm a little bit of I'm an artist one side of me, and I'm a techie nerd the other side of me. So it feeds both sides of my brain. So, yeah, I still, believe it or not, I still get excited about it. Yeah.
To see the current shift, I mean, obviously over the last few years, let's say over the last probably 4 years or something, Photoshop or Adobe in general, has more and more shifted towards generative AI. Does that feel like the biggest change that Photoshop has ever gone through? Or have there been previous transitions in the past that have felt equally disruptive?
I wouldn't say disruptive. I would say the biggest changes in the past were adding layers, and that was more, not disruptive. It was just kind of helping us get things done. It was something we wanted forever. No, but generative AI, as there's never been anything like this before. It's definitely completely changing the way we work, we live. I mean, people, don't even Google anymore. They ask AI, which is kind of sad because it gives them the wrong answer or an outdated answer quite often. But yeah, no, it's massively changing things. Yeah.
Do you think has Photoshop changed from originally being sort of a finishing tool into a place where ideas are now created and explored rather than just finished off?
That's a great question. And I don't think so. Because AI can do a lot of things. Like you can go into Photoshop and you can generate imagery directly in Photoshop. Sure. But you could go to Adobe Firefly and do the same thing with more features. If I just wanted to generate an image using Gemini, well, I'd just go to Google and do that because I can get 4K resolution. Um, so there's many platforms that you can use to generate imagery. I kinda look at generating imagery not as a replacement for skills or replacement photography, retouching, anything like that. I see it mostly as a replacement for stock photography, because I'm either gonna be working on my image or I'm gonna be working on a found image if I don't have it. And in the past, I would spend hours searching for stock photography. Maybe go to Adobe Stock, Fotolia, all the different platforms we all know, iStock Photo, whatever. I think they're gonna be very, very, disrupted, to the point when you go to Adobe Stock, you have to actually filter out the AI images because of a lot of Adobe Stock is AI now too. So I use AI as a tool, and the more I've kind of learned AI and the more I've started using it, the more I realize it's a great assistant. It's a good tool. But, I don't do much where I would be just generating an image from scratch. Like, I don't think, everyone sees it. Yeah, it's getting better and better and better and better. But it's still, we know the term AI slop, but also we're at a point now where it's so good, it's almost good enough. And now we're in, I'm sure you've heard the term uncanny valley is where we are now. So uncanny valley is, a study they've done, where things that look kinda human, they increase and people enjoy them more and more and more. As they get more realistic, people like them, but then it gets to a point where it's almost realistic. People's enjoyment of it drops substantially because now it becomes creepy and weird, where it's almost real, but not quite. It's like a human without emotions. It's like talking to a human with something weird in their eyes when they look at you. And so it goes like this, and then it drops substantially and then slowly starts to get better. And I think we're at a point of uncanny valley, especially when it comes to things like AI generated YouTube videos. People don't even know it's AI generated, but they just know something's off.
Yeah, that in itself is wild, though. I mean, if you think back to when Photoshop first introduced generative fill, for example, which is really not that long ago. It's like, what is it, 4 years ago or something like that?
About 5 years,
Yeah.
6 years ago, yeah, yeah.
To where we are now, where we have AI generated video that looks completely photorealistic. I mean, isn't that
Mhm.
crazy? Like the speed at which that particular
Oh,
technology has developed.
unbelievable. I remember when I first saw, as we all do, it's just like we woke up one day and suddenly AI was there. It's like, oh, okay. I kind of thought that AI would come along, it would replace accountants, it would replace, very analytical, kind of work. We never thought, I mean, I never thought, the arts. I thought, oh, okay, so we're just all going to retire and sit around and make art. And it's like, no, the first thing it came for was art, which was shocking. I mean, I'll admit, first time I saw it, I was frightening. I was depressed. I was freaked out. I didn't know what to do. Didn't know what to think. I was like, wow, this is it. This is it. It's the end of us. It's the end of our professions. It's the end of, it's over. And then once I started to play around with it a little bit and started to use it a little bit, I was like, "Oh, okay, there's a lot of weaknesses. There's a lot of things it can't do." So people's impression or their thumbnail of what they think something is and reality is often very, very different. And a lot of people just look at the headlines, surf the headlines, the thumbnails, and they think that's reality, and unless you dig into something a little bit, you don't understand because, it's the old adage, you don't know what you don't know. If you know nothing about a subject, you get a tiny little bit of information, suddenly you're an expert, and then the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. So you almost educate yourself into ignorance.
Yeah.
So a lot of people that just kind of dismiss it immediately, um whether they're doing it because, well, it's not good enough, or they're doing it because they hate it, they've got a bias against it, and that's fair, that's fine, you can have a bias, no, you don't have to like it. I'm not here to evangelize AI, it's completely up to you if you wanna use it or not. Um, but sometimes it's based on just not really understanding it enough, and we kind of fear the unknown. We could get into the whole story about the Luddites. Maybe we will during this conversation. It's a fascinating story, but yeah.
You know what I love about AI, is it's actually the creative aspect, 'cause, it's to me, it enables my kind of creative process. In the past, for example, what I would have done if I thought about creating a particular shot, right? I would have I would have looked for inspiration, you know? I would have looked at photographs, I would have looked, through books, I would have looked at, Pinterest, for instance, for years was a great platform to find inspiration about something. And, you create your
Sure.
own little your own little folder, and you look, you search for particular things like, family portrait with a ladder or something, right? And you have access to so many different images that give you inspiration. And then based on that, you then figure out, okay, well, this is what I want to do, and I want to take this element, and maybe that's, spawns an idea, and so on. And of course, what I
Mm,
do now is I very often use ChatGPT just simply, or Gemini to create some sketchbook images, basically, that allow me to kind of narrow down what I want to do. And so it's a inspirational sketchbook, as I call it. And that I find is
mm,
extremely powerful. And that really is it's a creative use of
mm.
AI, to me.
Yeah. That's a great way to use it. Build your own mood boards and stuff like that, which,
Yeah.
as you probably know, you can use Firefly boards and you can kind of do all that and keep everything in one place. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I see it, once again, as I said, I see it as a tool. Um, and sometimes it can do things that, it's so funny because I hear people say, well, there's no need for skill anymore. But so often we're doing things in there. Sometimes we are doing things that required skill. And sometimes we're doing things that we wouldn't have done. Like, I'm changing the clothing, and then, it's like, okay, is this replacing me? It's like, no, I wouldn't have attempted to change the clothing by hand. It's
Oh, yeah.
just that's just something I just wouldn't have done. And then there's other things where it can just really speed things up, like you mentioned, when it first came out, being able to change an image from portrait to landscape orientation, for example. Content aware, expand could sort of do that, but all it did is, stretch featureless parts. It couldn't build things in there. I mean, there used to be the old adage, in retouching, where something had to be in the photo. You couldn't create something that wasn't there. Although that's actually where I learned how to do. In the early 2000s, I was known for photorealistic illustration, and that became a necessity because I was working for magazines at the time and retouching covers, and certain things weren't there. I had to create them. I had to paint them and make them look real. And that was, before stock photography was easy to get a hold of. But essentially, you had to have the element in the photo, or you had to find another photo of that element where you would cut that out, you would drop it in, and then you could extend your photo, or you could replace something that's half missing. Often we would just crop it out and we'd be like, well, sorry, that's half there. That's just gone. It's the fastest ways to crop it. But sometimes you'd want to expand it because that one piece that you might crop out might be the very thing that's bringing context to that photograph. Say
Yeah.
you're at a concert and you're photographing the artist on the stage, and then you put this lighting. If you don't have the lighting, you could be in someone's living room doing it, right? So sometimes there's that context to give you the environment, which is part of the storytelling. Um, so, it definitely has changed things in that kind of area, whereas, yeah, I would say sometimes you would get an image that needed that, and sometimes you would just pass on the image. You'd be like, "This is a great image, but it's gonna take too long to fix the issues in this. I'll use a different one." So and then once again, when I said going from portrait to landscape, how often are you trying to create a cover, book cover, like, and I make courses, so I make covers for my courses, and they're always tall. And sometimes I've got a wide photo. I'm like, I love this photo. I would love to use this as my cover photo. But then I end up having to put text or a block on top or something, or a gradient or pixel stretch or whatever you're doing, trying to fill that space to make it fit. Whereas now, it's much easier to do that kind of stuff.
What's your earliest memory of using Photoshop? Um, and what was it that made you realize it was, more than simply another piece of design software?
Okay, so this was 32 years ago. Um, this is like right when, Photoshop was very young, first version. And I'd moved to the US, and I was offered a job as working in a magazine doing some, you know, creative work. So essentially I was just visiting, and I had um a friend. I did something for him, his boss, and they said, "We want to hire this guy." So they said, "Hey, we want to hire you. We'll sponsor you for your papers and all that kind of stuff." And so, I took the job. And at that time, I was using Corel Draw. And and that was what I knew, and that was what people were using at the time, and Corel Draw clip art maybe is what AI is today.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
It's
that's
just
what it
about
was.
everywhere, right? And and then I remember that we had this thing called Photoshop. And one of the things I loved doing was creating shadows. And I did the best I could in Corel. And then I remember creating a shadow in Photoshop, and this is before layers. And I was like, wow, I can create realistic, soft shadows. This is amazing. And then, of course, I discovered, the filters that you should use like once in your entire career, like the spear eyes filter, and you put people's
Yep.
faces in it, and, the plastic wrap, and
Oh, yeah.
lens flare, and, and all those, kind of legacy things, that people, I guess that was the visual equivalent of Comic Sans in the day. But everybody hadn't seen it, and you're just like, wow, this looks so realistic. And that just had me hooked. I was like, wow, okay, this is cool. And I'm gonna spend my time really learning this and mastering this. And I made a goal of that, and just, there was there was no internet then.
Yeah.
So resources were hard to come by. So experimentation was important, and it came with a user manual. And I remember that big old printed user manual. I read it and learned, and so that's just what I did. And so every day I would go in and go into the menu, and I'd be like, okay, as soon as I come to an item, I don't know what it is, I'm going to stop and I'm going to learn that item. And that's essentially how I learned Photoshop.
Yeah, I remember these manuals. There was a series called Adobe Classroom in a book or something like that. Do you remember those?
Oh yeah, yeah, I contributed to one, the Flash one actually.
Oh, okay.
Um, yeah,
I remember those. I mean, it's oh man. I mean, it was
yeah.
nuts. And my first encounter with Photoshop was actually through my dad. So my dad came back one day, and they had manipulated a photo. So my dad was in the industry. Um, and it was just a photo of me playing the guitar, sitting on my bed, basically. Nothing special, really just a better snapshot, basically. And he goes like, "Oh, look at the shot. Do you notice something?" Look at it, and I'm like, I, what? I don't notice anything. What is it? And he goes, "Well, we've taken one of your hands and flipped it around and replaced the other hand with that hand. So now both hands are the same." And I look at it, and it's like, whoa, yeah, that's unbelievable. It looked so real. It just
Yeah,
looked
yeah,
real, but it was
yeah,
very evidently the same hand. And of course, it's not something I'd noticed just by looking at the picture, and that to me, that kind of woke up this thing where I thought, you can do that, you know, like what
yeah,
in a computer, that's wild.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
yeah, and that's that started me off for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, it's just wasn't it just fascinating because people were not used to seeing photo foolery back then,
Yeah.
because before that, what you had to get scissors and cut things out and paste them together. I mean, like,
Yeah.
literally, this was the beginning of, photoshopping.
This episode is brought to you by Platypod. You know these moments when you really need a tripod, but taking one with you just feels like too much effort? Too big, too heavy, too awkward to carry around? Well, that's exactly why I love Platypod. I use it in my own work because it gives me a really solid, stable platform for my camera in places where a regular tripod simply is not practical. There's the rugged extreme for larger camera setups, the incredibly versatile Delta, the compact traveler for when space is tight, and the handle, which lets you position your camera in all sorts of creative places. And for portrait photographers, Bracket & Bounce is a brilliant portable lighting solution. It helps create flattering directional light without dragging softboxes around, or depending on whatever ceiling happens to be above you. For landscapes, macro, video, wildlife, portraits, or travel photography, Platypod helps you get shots that would otherwise be difficult or even impossible. Head over to platypod.com to take a look. Platypod, where innovation never sleeps. Yeah, well, exactly. Yeah, there were little things, like little things. I remember, I was living just after, I moved to the UK, and then we had neighbors, and they moved back to the States or something, and as a parting gift or something, I because it was like a little village and like a community. So I went out and I took pictures of all of our neighbors in that little area of our road, and then I took a picture of the house and I basically pasted everybody in Photoshop.
Oh,
You know,
neat. Yeah, yeah.
and of course, by modern standards, it probably looked absolutely terrible. But back then, it was like, again, it was like, uh, that's unbelievable that I could do that, on my
Yeah.
computer, sort of thing. And so it was just, yeah. I mean, I think it was as mind blowing to me back then as some of the AI stuff is now. We just go,
Oh, sure. I mean, you first saw it, it was, like, it was just amazing because 'cause you're just like, "Wow, this looks real." Like,
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
maybe these days it doesn't,
yeah,
because some of the things we did back then were that but that was the times we were living in and the style
yeah.
and people's expectations. The exciting thing about it back in the early days, though, is it was so easy to blow people's minds. Well, if you put some effort in.
It's,
Whereas that's one of the
yeah.
downsides of AI. I don't know if it's gonna be possible to amaze people with imagery anymore.
So you're right. This reminds me of special effects in movies where, if you were, and I remember this because I was there, if you were in 1983 and you watched Return of the Jedi, right? Or
Of
in
course.
1977 and you watched Star Wars, the special effects
Yeah,
just blew you away. Like, for instance, the special effects in The Empire Strikes Back at the Battle of Hoth, with the AT-AT walkers, for example. Back in
yeah,
the
yeah.
day, that looked incredible. You watch that now in 2026, you go, yeah, stop motion animation. Nah. you know,
I
I mean, it's
still
still,
think it holds up, though, Star Wars compared to a lot of other stuff at the time.
of course. But, the thing is, like, as always, you look at a movie and the special effects like 20 years. Like,
Yeah.
I just watched a little bit of Jurassic Park this afternoon, mainly because,
Mm,
yeah, just because I felt like it. And of course, I remember that movie coming out in 1992, whenever it was, you know,
mm,
and thinking like that's absolutely mind blowing. And of course, you watch it today, and again, you kind of go, hmm,
yeah.
nah, not sure. But it's sort of, it's the critical eye that sort of matures over time, in a sense, as we get used to better and better
Yeah.
looking special effects. And I think the same thing is really true when it comes to image manipulation. And you're right, as far as AI is concerned, now that we're past six fingers on a hand, you know, there's possibly a point where, you know, it might not necessarily get any better. But when you first built like the first version of Photoshop Cafe back in,
Mhm.
I guess, in the early 2000s, what was the main problem that you were trying to solve for creatives back then?
So interesting thing about that was, I was trying to help people, because when I was trying to learn Photoshop, there was just no resources available. Um, And I remember, and I was very fortunate because from day one, I was doing it professionally, so I was already hired as graphic designer. And so I was working with it every day. And also, the bar was high because everything had to be production level. So I was very lucky. And I had a great mentor, who was an expert in the cut and paste days, and learned a lot about color and composition and just so many things from him, Dr. Jensen. And I remember we wanted to create this metallic looking, we wanted to do like a brushed gold kind of background for a something we were working on. I don't even remember what it was anymore, but and it was a CD, a music CD that we had, or and it had a cover on it, and it had that effect, and we're like, "That's the effect. That's all we want." And so we did some research, and we found out the design agency that created it. And I called them up and said, "Hey, just want to ask you, is this? I see the background you did on this. Is this something? Is there a source somewhere where you can buy this? Like, did you get it on a CD? Was it some kind of a background collection? You remember they used to sell those on
Oh,
DVDs
yeah.
back in the day, or was that something you created?" That was all I was asking them. And they said, "Well, sorry, our policy is that we do not disclose any of our trade secrets." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And then I was like, "Screw them. I'm gonna figure this out, and I'm gonna show the world how to do this, and
Yeah.
not just this, but lots of other things." And that's when Photoshop Cafe began. And every week I created a tutorial. I figured out how to do something, and I wasn't doing videos at the time. I was just doing written tutorials. 'Cause, YouTube hadn't been invented yet.
Yeah.
And then so I just started doing written tutorials and screen captures and started, doing weekly tutorials. Yeah.
So, what did a useful Photoshop tutorial look like? So, in the early days of the internet, when that first happened, and why did you favor teaching through practical projects rather than simply explaining like menus and tools and things like that?
Oh, that's a great question. I always wanted to teach that way because I found it inspiring. Because I was like, "You know what? I'm not an academic. I'm not a professional educator. I'm an artist. I'm a practitioner." And so I wanted to teach, my strength was creating. And I'll be honest, I didn't even know what half these tools were actually supposed to do. I just knew what I was using them for. I didn't have a relationship with Adobe at the time. So I just figured out how to do things, and practical things that I figured people wanted to know. So it could be anything from putting a person inside a car to creating a brush metal effect, to creating an explosion, creating realistic blood, creating fake 3D shapes, applying photo filter effects, applying
Mhm.
sepia tone, like lens leaks, lens flares, like, just all these different types of things, extruded 3D Superman text, just things that I came across in my everyday work. And I was like, "Oh, yeah, people might want to know how to do this, vignettes, whatever." And I remember, like, someone asked me, said, "Do you ever run out of ideas?" And I'm like, "No, I'm not running out of ideas. I've got tons of ideas," because I was doing it every day for a living. So I wasn't, and I didn't mean that in an arrogant way or anything. It was just, no, I had more ideas than I had time to create these tutorials. So I created, a lot of tutorials at the time, and the website blew up. And this is before social media. There was no Facebook or, Instagram or anything like that. And I remember, we started getting millions and millions of visitors, and I wasn't monetizing anything. I was just giving it away. And I remember the web host called me and asked me to leave. They wanted me to go somewhere else because I was creating too much traffic and it was costing them
Oh,
too much.
nice.
Which is a good problem to have, right? And then, later on, I had a relationship with Media Temple. I don't know if you heard of them. And they sponsored me and hosted my website for years, and I had a little "Powered by Media Temple" badge on the bottom. So I guess that was a brand, my first
Mhm.
brand deal. And they gave me, website, uh, bandwidth in exchange.
Did you have any sense back then that Photoshop Cafe could still be relevant more than 2 decades later?
Gosh, no. I didn't it was never a business, which is, why I never monetized. It was just a fun hobby. I had no expectations for it. I didn't think it was gonna, blow up. I didn't think it was gonna become my full-time job.
Yeah.
I no, I didn't dream that at the time.
I mean, you mentioned that in the beginning you used to give everything away for free, and you didn't monetize like your website, for example. Um,
Yeah.
how have you balanced giving away a huge amount of free education with essentially building a sustainable creative business? What's the how does that what does that balance look like?
So everything I put on Photoshop Cafe is free. I don't run ads today. There's no sponsored ads on the website. You won't see banners and stuff like that at all. I mean, I remember for a period of time I experimented with doing banners and things, and then they wanted skyscrapers and takeovers, and I'm just like, oh no, this is just ruining the experience. So I just took all the advertising off completely. Decided to make all the content free, which it already was. But then monetization has come, I've got some brand deals over the years, where brands have, done integrations, collaborations, stuff like that. I do a little bit of that, but the majority of the money really comes from the courses. So my business model is everything on the website is free. We make money from the courses, and that's it. So if you're enjoying the free content, there's no paywalls, there's no restrictions, there's nothing. There's no friction. Just go in and enjoy it. And I didn't wanna create friction. I didn't wanna create logins and memberships and all that kind of stuff. So part of it is it's kind of funny because the internet's changed. Maybe I'm definitely old school. And the philosophy I remember because I was an early computer person before computers are mainstream. I was using a Sinclair Spectrum ZX
Ooh, I remember those.
back
Yeah.
in the '80s. I remember using the AT, IBM, SX33. I think I have a DX3025 before that, SX33, and then, like, early computers, 256 colors was kind of, groundbreaking, Windows 3, and then just going
Mhm.
through all that. So I went through that kind of but there was, America Online, I remember, when all those CDs were going around, that might have been my 2nd dive into interacting with other people, but the first one was before that. I remember Wildcat BBSs. And
Mm.
so bulletin boards were how people interacted, which is kind of funny. It's like social media before social media. And then I guess the man came in with America Online.
Yeah.
But it was just enthusiasts with enthusiasts. And it was a rule, an unwritten rule, and it was the honor rule. And the honor rule is if you take anything, give something back of equal value. So we would share things and it'd be like, have this, but we would always return to the community something of value. So you would take and you would give in exchange. And the internet was such a beautiful place at that time, because it was this place of, where there was honor and people were in it just to make money. I could say some strong words about some of the people that are just, I feel like, exploiting everybody for their own gain at this point. I'm not against capitalism, obviously, but just things were different. I don't know if you remember those days.
I remember them. Yeah, I do remember them. I remember the early days. In fact, I remember, you know, the days a life before the internet, completely. I think, when
Yeah.
the internet really um, blew blew up, I wasn't really part of it because I was studying music at the time.
Mm,
Um, and so, I was sort of off the boil, as it were. It was like I would sit in my room playing a guitar rather than looking at the internet. Back
mm.
in those days, it was really I kind of got into it through Photoshop actually. You know, I eventually got hold of a copy of an inexpensive copy, I should say, of Photoshop. As everybody did back in those
Oh, we
days.
all we all had we all had
Yeah,
the inexpensive version.
you know, um, I rather, I I neither. What do they say? Uh, I don't. agree or deny or whatever the wording is. But confirm or deny. That's it. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
You know, but yeah, that was that was my way into it. And then I found resources online. And I remember because I was experimenting with macromedia stuff as well at the same time. And then of
Oh,
course,
yeah.
then
Okay, that's great.
Adobe,
Yeah.
yeah, and then Dreamweaver and things like that. And then Adobe bought up macromedia, and it
I
all
remember.
became
Yep.
it became part of the Adobe sort of
Yep.
environment. Um,
Mhm.
and then I think that's when stuff started to catch my eye around that time.
Mm.
Of stuff that was available online, and then I realized I could learn really quickly online. Probably through similar. And again, this was prior to YouTube.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
but yeah, I'd find websites and articles and examples and things like that, and so that was a huge learning aid. But it was still a much slower process than it is today, because literally today I just take if there's a problem, I take a snapshot of the screen, upload it into ChatGPT, and go help, and it'll just solve the problem for me. I mean, it's a completely different thing.
Mm.
But I mean, what's interesting about Photoshop Cafe is you've moved through all of these different media, books, um, discs, seminars, downloadable courses, live stream, and now YouTube.
Mhm.
Which transition was the hardest, and which transition do you think changed your career the most?
Hmm. That's a good question. As far as the hardest, I don't know, any were hard because 'cause I've just always evolved, so when I was doing the written steps, I was also writing books. I've written 23 books, I believe, somewhere in there. Um, but also you mentioned Macromedia. I was also using Macromedia because at that time I'd moved as a creative director at a multimedia company, and I was using Flash and
Mm,
Dreamweaver a lot as well. And that's, my phase where I was doing interactive design. And I wrote books on Flash as well. I don't know if you knew that. I actually had my name
mm,
in two of the splash screen Flash. Worked very closely with, when Adobe took it over. I was working with Macromedia before that. And so, because, I was still using Photoshop, but that Flash was kind of like the canvas where everything
mm,
came together. Um, so the most painful part of the whole transition was when they killed Flash, and I knew it was dead, so I moved immediately from that. I wasn't gonna just ride the ship all the way down because I knew it was over. Um,
yeah.
as far as teaching, YouTube is fun. So YouTube is funny because I joined YouTube, I don't know, 15 years ago whenever it started. And because a friend of mine, Al Ward, at the time, was like, "Oh, you gotta post on this YouTube thing." I made a video of, one of our tutorials, and say Al, him and I co-authored 2 books together. And he goes, "I got 1,000,000 views on it." I'm like, "Oh, really?" So I'm like, "Yeah." So I made a YouTube video. It didn't get 1,000,000 views, so I didn't open YouTube again for years. So I just thought, "Yeah, views," "Oh, it didn't work." And so then over time, I did post the occasional video on YouTube. But at that time, I was still focusing on written tutorials and screen captures, stuff you could put in books. Um, and then at some point, I decided, okay, so the funny thing is my courses, I was all videos. So that was kind of the thing is, I mean, I've been doing courses for 20 years. I created my first video course in Flash. It was a Photoshop training video, but Flash didn't support video. So I
Mhm.
hacked it to make my own video. I built my own video player, before they had video support, before they did the FLV. And so I was literally doing it as an image sequence, and I was able to create my first, uh, training video, interactive CD. It was on CD, because I didn't want it to be playing on a DVD player. I wanted it to be on the desktop, and I think it was probably, as far as I know, I was the first person to do that.
Mm.
Because I know, because some of the other companies wanted to license my interface and stuff later. But anyway, so I created the first training video like that, and then all my courses were video, and my content on the website was written. And then at some point, I decided to take YouTube seriously. And it's only been like maybe 6 years or something since I've been really serious about YouTube, where, I post on a regular basis, which is, weekly at a minimum. I do one tutorial a week. And then it just kind of integrated into part of my ecosystem. So I still do the written tutorials on the website with the screen captures, but I do a video component as well, which, is something that's very unique. I don't know if anyone else is doing that. I
Mm.
mean, yes, they probably get a transcript, they post it or run the transcript through AI, and occasionally I'll do that if I get behind. But most of the time the written tutorials are written by me, not by
Mm.
AI. So if you go on the website, today, there's a video and then there's written step with that, because some people like to learn by video, some people like to learn by written. I could see AI, maybe eventually taking over the written side of things. And I am starting to, use it a little bit more. Because if it comes down to a choice of like, am I going to say written steps coming soon, which when I get busy, I do. And then sometimes they never come.
Yeah.
Versus doing a transcription and then putting it through, I've got my own, trained the AI to write it in a certain way in my voice, and,
Mm.
kind of over time correcting it and getting it closer. So, I still change a lot of it, but it can kind of speed things up. And that's better than coming soon. Um,
Yeah.
but where I think video training is, it's here to stay. And the reason I say that is because you can go on ChatGPT or Claude and you can learn how to do anything. And for some people, that's enough. And that's enough to learn how to do something now. Like I need to create a reflection in Photoshop. How do I do that? That's good. But it's not going to teach you a profession. It's going to teach you how to do things, but it's not
Mm.
going to teach you. There's a difference between someone who can do things in Photoshop and someone that can use Photoshop.
Oh,
Where
good
you're
point.
understanding
Yeah.
Photoshop, you're knowing what you're doing, you're knowing the capabilities, you're starting with the end in mind, you're playing chess with the results, um, and there's so many gaps that people are not gonna be looking for, things that you're gonna learn in a video course that you're not gonna learn on a YouTube video because people don't have the patience for it. So, a lot of the detailed teaching I do are in my courses, and is that because I'm trying to monetize them? No. People would complain when I give them training on YouTube. People want fixes.
Mhm.
They wanna know how to do things, but they don't wanna learn. And I know
Yeah.
that sounds crazy, but, like, if I start teaching like, "Here's a shadow. Oh, let me teach you about the science of how a shadow works." People are like, "Dude, stop talking and just show me how to do it." That's YouTube.
Yeah.
Whereas
Well,
in a
exactly.
course,
Yeah.
people are like, "I wanna know why. Why does a shadow look like that? How can I see? Teach me how to see." So you're teaching a bigger thing in video, and AI just can't do that in a human way. Even though you can have an AI avatar, but it's something different when you've got a human. AI can imitate a human, but it cannot have a personality.
Yeah.
And, and the personality comes with that backstory, with that experience of all the things you have seen, learned, and experienced that have taken you to this point of who you are. And AI doesn't have that.
Yeah. And also we connect with humans. That's what humans do.
Yeah.
So that's why I think video is so powerful because it allows us to connect with the human on the other side of the screen in a sense. Um,
Yeah.
and you're absolutely right. I mean, this is one of the things I've discussed many times on this podcast is one of the greatest disadvantages of YouTube in a sense is that it's literally this ocean of seemingly disconnected bits of information. And in education in general, and I spent 25 years teaching in schools, the way you teach somebody how to become good at anything is by you create a learning path, one lesson, one step at a time. And each follow-up
Yeah.
lesson builds on something and you have an overall, map of how you're going to get to the end result. So,
Yeah.
my example is always like skin retouching, for example, or like, face retouching, let's say, portrait retouching. There's so many elements to that that
Mhm.
will turn you into a great or capable retoucher. Um, and just learning how to retouch skin in one out of many different ways is just not going to achieve that. It's one little slap in that paved path full of paving slabs, whatever that get that get you to your final destination.
Yeah.
But the problem with YouTube is, of course, that you don't know, as you said earlier, you don't know what you don't know, and so it's impossible almost to see what the next step would be. And that's, I think, it's the biggest downside, which is why I like platforms that create learning paths. Where it's
Yeah.
like a course sort of situation. Where you're like, okay,
Sure.
well, we're gonna do skin retouching, and we're really gonna get into all of the details and the different facets of it. And by the time you finish that course, let's say, you think, well, now I know how to deal with skin, and I know how to deal with different
Mm.
skin tones, different complexions, different whatever, reflect,
Yeah.
reflect, whatever the word is, reflect. What am I trying to say?
Reflective.
Reflectivity. That's it. Yeah, exactly. You know, and all the rest of it. Um,
Sure.
and it just takes all.
Translucence
Yeah,
and,
absolutely. Yeah,
like
exactly. Skin imperfections, blah 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 blah.
correction.
There's so many different
Yeah.
facets to it that make
Mhm.
you um, a good, or a capable or great retoucher. And you talk to people who are really good at it, like Lisa Carney, for example. I mean, the breadth and depth of her knowledge when it comes to all things retouching is just phenomenal. Because she's just the experience is just such that she's just
Yeah, and she's doing it all day, every day. Yeah.
all day. Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. So, I mean, and that would have actually totally been my next question. What does it take in 2026 with all the automated tools that we have, and the AI aided tools in Photoshop? What does it take to truly understand Photoshop rather than simply knowing how to operate it?
Well, I like your Christian, and I also like I'm just gonna tag on a little bit what you were saying, earlier just now, because you're an educator and you understand that. So, one of the things is when you're learning something, but even on a side note, it just brings you so much satisfaction, as you're learning something because 'cause you're growing
Mhm.
completely. Because with information and knowledge, as you know, and you said you were a professional teacher, so you probably understand teaching better than I do. I fortunately, I have a natural gift, but I don't understand, like, I haven't read books on how to teach. So you actually know how to teach probably better than I do. But one of the things I've learned is knowledge, and this is what we all know, knowledge doesn't live in little particles.
Mhm.
It's chained together like DNA. Um, like you would call it a learning path, or you in order to learn something new, I think I don't know, was it Einstein or somebody said you have to hang knowledge onto existing knowledge. So you build it like a mobile, or
Yeah.
so and in order to understand something, you have to learn something else that's related to it. So there's that connection. So you're understanding about color, and now you can talk about, oh, now I know what colors are, and now I know what primary colors are. Oh, now I know what primary colors are. Now I can understand the secondary colors, complementary colors. Oh, I can understand additive subtractive colors. Now I can understand light versus pigment, and then you can go down and start to attach that knowledge to other knowledge. You used the example of retouching. I became very well known in the um, 2000s or later 2000s from photorealistic illustration. I won some awards and did books and got some FaceTime because of that. But I didn't learn that from learning how to draw or learning how to paint. I got it from retouching. So as I was learning more about retouching, then I was learning, oh, there's shadow, there's light. And then there's in life, you're looking around and you're seeing how light interacts. And, I would do things like, okay, water, like, well, water's clear. So how do I know it's water? Like, how do we visually, see which side we go to, visually tell that this is what, I mean, apart from the writing here, that it's not sponsored by Costco. Um, but it's like, water's clear. How do we know it's water? Well, because of the refraction of the shape. See how it's distorting the background?
Mm.
Also, the highlights. Oh, okay. Oh, look, the shadow in there too. And then so I would just start to observe and look at things and see, you know, science. Like, what makes this appear like water? And just looking at things closely. And then I'll be, "Oh, okay, so I'll just do that in Photoshop. I'll distort it. I see there's a highlight. I'll add some highlights. Well, where did the highlights come from? Oh, where's my light source? Oh, the light source is coming from here. And then you're knowing this and retouching. You're knowing, oh, does the water create a oh, no, it doesn't. It actually creates a piece of light. Oh, so when I'm retouching, I'll make sure that I do that. And then as I'm learning to see and I'm learning to retouch, different objects, people, vehicles, you know, creating tornadoes that don't exist for magazine covers and stuff like that I did. Um, you're learning to see, but then it gets to a point where you're learning, yes, you're learning about light, you're learning about light direction, shadow, and then what happens is, "Oh, now I can illustrate." No one taught me to illustrate, but as you're growing as a person and your skills are increasing, you get to a point where you don't need anyone to teach you certain things because it's just gonna be a natural evolution of your mindset. So, like, you're just like, I started drawing people. I started creating and I was like, I never took a drawing class,
Mm.
but is looking realistic because I already learned these skills. Now, if I was just learning how to do tasks, it wouldn't enable me to expand to be able to do peripheral tasks. I'd only be able to do the task and, and those piecemeal things is the epiphany of what we and maybe I'm using the wrong word, of what people used to say, we've all heard it a million times, the cliche, "You give a man a fish, you feed him for a meal. Teach him to fish, you feed him for a lifetime." And that was one of the foundational philosophies of Photoshop Cafe. I'm like, I'm gonna teach people how to fish so they're not gonna be dependent on me. And that was like when I did my Lightroom course. Like, at that time, I remember Lightroom came out and everyone was learning Lightroom, and people were doing 50 courses. I'm like, "Come on, Lightroom is not that complicated. You don't need 50 courses." I did 1 course on Lightroom, and then to today, I still have 1 course on Lightroom. I update it every few years, and it's like I can teach them to fish. I don't want people to become dependent on me, and that's probably a bad business model. A good business model would be people are dependent on me and they need to come back to me. But I was like, "You know what? I feel like if I can teach people how to become self-sufficient, how to learn for themselves, how to grow, and actually build a foundation and build off it, then, that's much more satisfying." And we're at a point where I don't know, it's like old school, right? Apprenticeships is where artists learned, Michelangelo, you know, he was an apprentice and his his master quit when he painted his first angel. His master's like, "Oh, Sacre Bleu." Like, he wasn't French, but I don't know Italian.
Dio
Because
mio.
he right? But the apprenticeship is how we used to learn. We would learn from each other, and but I did an apprenticeship, before I was doing this. I was working for telecom
Mm.
and, telecommunications, and I did a whole apprenticeship. I did the whole, where my job was making tea. My job was digging holes. Like, I didn't get to do anything useful the first couple of years. I had to learn my place and, but
Yeah.
what you don't realize is you're actually learning a lot of things at that time.
It's unbelievably valuable. I mean, it's the same in it was exactly the same in the music industry, when I spent 20 something years in the music industry. And, it's the same thing, back in the I mean, even when I was sort of active back in this late 90s, um, you know, the vast majority of people who turn out to be really talented producers and well-known producers started as teen coffee boys in recording studios, you know?
Yeah.
And, even in my own experience, as a session musician, for instance, I learned a lot just by being around the studio, and watching people do what they do. I never had formal training in how to use a mixing desk, for example.
Mhm.
I've just learned by sitting with engineers and asking questions and watching, and observing, and you go, oh, that's what a compressor does. I didn't realize that.
Mhm.
But I never
Yeah.
went to audio engineering college or anything. And it's the same. Actually, it's the same in photography.
Yeah.
I think,
Yeah.
and of course, different, as you mentioned earlier, different people are different types of learners. Some people are kinetic learners. Some people are,
Mm.
learn from reading books. My wife is very good at reading books, and she learns that way. I'm really good at watching videos. That's my form of learning. But the thing I think above and beyond anything else, um, that works for me is actually accompanying somebody, watching somebody do something. So
Mhm. Yeah.
I can never, I could never read and learn how to, I don't know, caulk my bathroom, you know,
Mm. Yeah,
by
yeah.
reading an instruction manual. My brain just wouldn't. It just would not work. But if I was in the room, with somebody who knows how to do it, I could learn it
Was
really
showing
quickly.
you how to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, just by watching. And so,
Yeah.
and I think that's the thing. I've had some great, fantastic opportunities of spending time with Russell Preston Brown, for example, or with Joe Grimes, and actually shooting with them. And although I
Yeah.
only spent like a couple of days with them, I've learned
Mm.
so much.
Yeah.
Just in you know what they look for, how they look at things. It's not the lighting. I know how to light things. I know how to light portraits inside out. It's not. I've been doing this for flipping ever. and, You know,
Yeah.
but it's not that. You know,
Mm.
I've learned how to communicate with your
Mm.
subject. I've learned how to get the thing that you want. What to look for. Is these sort of things. That's this also. This the thing I used to love about Photoshop, and like, when you learn how to retouch an eye, for example, the
Mm.
next time you look at a portrait shot, I mean, I would look at the eyes and I'd be like, ah, that's what they did. And
Yeah.
you come across something, you go like, I wonder how they did that, you know, and it just
Yeah.
sparks off that curiosity. I think that's the thing that I've always loved. But it's things are getting easier with things like Evoto, for example.
Mhm.
Where I mean, slide a slider, and all of a sudden your eyes look amazing, and you go, "Wha-" you know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I mean, and that makes me wonder, like,
Mm.
new tools like Evoto,
Mhm.
makes me wonder, do photographers still need like a proper understanding of curves, your color, tone control, stuff like that, when software can make
Mm.
increasingly intelligent adjustments for them? Is there still a need to really have that in-depth knowledge, or can photographers now rely on these tools to do that for them?
Mm. Well, that's a great question. And I think it's easier now to do things, but let's use, throw things back a few years, clip art. Everyone had access to clip art. Why could some people put pieces of clip art together and something would look beautiful? And then someone else would look like they're the person that works at the front desk at a law firm. You know, So, just because the tools are easier to use, it doesn't give you taste. It doesn't give you a vision of what you want to do. So you're just gonna move sliders around. So,
Yeah.
"Oh, the skin looks smooth. Oh, I move it more, the skin looks even smoother." But your eye isn't trained to see the pores are disappearing. Your eyes aren't trained to know when you're moving into uncanny valley. We'll
Oh,
circle back to that.
that's a huge
Um,
mistake. I mean,
you know
it's just, and I'm just gonna interrupt it for a minute, but that's totally true, because I've experienced that myself, actually.
Yeah,
Since I switched over to Evoto to do things like portrait retouching, especially with headshots. You know, I've had there were a couple of occasions where I got a response from the subject that I shot. To ask me to cut tune down the photoshopping on it. And I'm thinking, well, that's interesting because that's never happened. That's never happened before when I manually used to retouch things. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
so and it's because you have to be more granular when you manually retouch something in Photoshop rather than just sliding a slider. And it, it- so that has taught me that it really requires self control. It's actually not as easy as just flipping a slider.
Yeah, well, and also is learning, like one of the things I had to learn was makeup. So would have my girlfriends, over the years, I'd be like, hey, teach me about makeup. Like what does it do? Why are you using this? Why are you using that? And just understanding that, because if you don't know what makeup's supposed to look like, then
Yes, good
everyone's
point.
gonna look at you clown.
Yeah,
You know? You're and then say like, say a photo, for instance, I can put digital makeup and I can do skin smoothing. I probably wouldn't wanna do both because I would be using makeup to give the appearance of smoother skin. Why would I want to smoothen the skin as well?
yeah,
So, there's things like that, that having that knowledge, like AI, yeah, you can do anything you want, but when do you know when to stop? How do you know what you should do? And how do you know what's right or wrong? One example, I like to ask people, what color is chrome? And most people say silver. And I probably should have asked you that question. And
yeah,
if you look at it, it's not silver. It's if you look at it, yeah, at a passing glance, because our mind simplifies everything. If everything was, our mind was to take everything in detail, we wouldn't be able to function because there'd be so much information. So our mind just glances over things unless we focus on it. So you look at something chrome, silver, but then you look at it, oh no, it's not. Oh, it's actually reflecting the environment. All the colors of whatever's in front of it is what you're seeing, right? So if you don't even know what you're looking at, how do you know what sliders you should move, or, what you should tell AI to do? And if you get a result, is that good or is it bad? Show me 2 results. Without an understanding, um, yeah, it's a powerful tool, but it's not gonna replace knowledge, like having knowledge and knowing what you're looking for, knowing what you want the AI to. I mean, what do you even do for a prompt? You're like, "You want a gobo? You want a flex?" If you don't know what a gobo is, how are you going to tell it that? Um, so, in that sense, I think, the knowledge is really, really important, but there's another. I'm even gonna go a little bit further, and I think that and yes, I use AI all the time. It's a great time saver. I teach it. People should definitely learn it. Um, but at the same time, you should also learn Photoshop, because when is the last time maybe it's different for you, but my experience, I've never been able to get where I want with AI. It'll get me 80% of the way. It'll get a lot of the work done, but then there's stuff where it can't do the simplest thing, and it's done this amazing, Leonardo da Vinci piece, and you're like, "Change that to green," and it can't, or it's got text with 2 L's where there should be 1. Do it with 1 L, and it gives you 2 L's. It keeps giving you 2 L's, and then it'll give you a P, or it'll change that green to, sometimes it just does that weird thing, and it gets stuck on it, and it's frustrating, and it's like, "Man, it's so much easier, just fix it in Photoshop." So
you're right.
instead of retouching photos, now I'm retouching AI. And
Yeah,
if I didn't have that Photoshop knowledge, I'd be spending a million credits and hours in AI in something I can do in 90 seconds in Photoshop.
it's one of the most frustrating issues actually. And I've recently used AI for flyer design, for example, right? And um, sometimes you just wanted to change. I wanted to change one word in a bit of the text, like the headline or something. Change this to that.
I
And it'll come back and it would have changed not just that one word. It would have changed everything. And you go, no, that's not. I just,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah. And I've done
So
that with thumbnails, yeah.
yeah, oh my god. I mean, thumbnails is another thing. I'm experimenting with AI generated thumbnails at the moment, and of course there are huge advantages to that.
Sure.
But the minute you have to change something, it is, it gets very tricky. Do you think that is, knowing when to stop editing, is one of the most important and least teachable Photoshop skills, really, or editing skills. Is actually just
Sure.
when to stop.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, let's go even further than that. Not every photo needs editing. Sometimes the photo's great as it is. You don't need to do anything, you know?
That's
And
true.
people think because they've got this set of sliders, they have to move them. And some people think they have to move every slider. Like, oh, I haven't moved that slider yet. Like they go in library
Mm,
and move everything. And it's like, and it just looks over processed. There's a place and time for that if you're trying to stylize something.
yeah.
But yeah, no, absolutely. I think a lot of people, especially beginners of a process, I know I did it. I used to think the perfect skin looked like plastic, like back in the day, before I realized, oh,
Yeah.
the pores just, before frequency separation and even frequency separation got ridiculous, where people would overdo frequency for separation. So it looked like people were made of wax with these freckles floating in the wax. And I was like, oh, that's frequency separation, like overdone, but everyone did it for a while.
Well, that's the thing. I think, when I started using frequency separation manually, with with a tablet, uh, I think because you're brushing things in, which is really it's amazing because you can be so precise and accurate, and treat different parts of the skin in different ways and so forth. Um, but there's a real danger that you just keep brushing away, and
Yeah. Yeah,
before
and
you
you
know it,
look at the picture and you can see that someone used frequency separation. A well-retouched photo should not look retouched.
exactly. Yeah, it's a mistake I make in a photo, by the way. That's
Yeah,
totally,
if
and I
you
can
can
see
see
it.
what they did, they failed,
Yeah,
you know? Like, really, it should
yeah,
be it should be transparent, like, your retouching should not be noticeable.
yeah. Do non-destructive workflows still matter as much as they once did, or
Oh, yeah.
has modern software changed the way we should think about them? Do you think?
Well, that's maybe one of the annoying things about AI, because I think people can't wait for the day when AI is able to do layers, which, I guess some of the stuff they're doing now with the agents, Adobe's agentic AI that, they recently released, but it's terrible. It's just at the moment. I mean, I know it'll get better. And sorry, friends at Adobe, if you're watching this, but I mean, it's takes a million times longer than I can do it, and
Mm.
the results are horrible. I mean, they will get better over
Yeah,
time, but that's the only way AI is really that I can see you're gonna get AI to work non-destructively. And, yeah, and if I wanna change something, I don't wanna have to redo the whole image to change one thing. And that's the problem with AI right now is and not just that, but think about the resources it's using. It takes more resources to edit something than it does to generate it from scratch. That's why some models, like Flux, uses more credits to do an edit. It uses twice as many credits than it does to generate in the first place because it's actually much more difficult, which is hilarious.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think the layers thing could literally be a repeat of the first Photoshop revolution when layers were first introduced, and it could just now be in an AI context, and it would have almost the same revolutionary effect because that would solve so many problems, in designing just about anything.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and I find that I'm doing that now. To give an example, a thumbnail, I'll generate 3 thumbnails, and then I end up compositing them all together and taking pieces of different thumbnails, and then, so even if I'm doing an AI thumbnail, it's still 50% Photoshop, but, I'm literally extracting elements like, "Oh, I like that checkbox,
mm,
let me do that," or, "I don't like the way that ChatGPT does my horrified look." The great face,
yeah.
like,
Mm.
Adobe, actually oh, my battery just exhausted on my camera, so it might disappear in a second.
Oop.
Let me change the battery. There it is.
Cool.
Oh, good timing here. Alright,
Hey.
let me just change it up. Maybe that face shouldn't be on there anyway.
You know what I really hate about about ChatGPT's thumbnail generation is that it makes me look much older than well, maybe it makes me look my real age, but it definitely makes me look older than I think I look, in my
Yeah,
head.
that's me, I see that too, and it's like I have this image of myself. You know who was the worst at that was that Sora. Remember Sora?
Oh yeah.
And Sora used to make me look like an 80-year-old. Oh, it was terrible, you know? So I should be back again. Okay, there we go.
There we go.
Yeah, but one point I did wanna bring up on that, since we're talking just on thumbnails, because, not everyone uses Photoshop just for photography. Some people use it for design work, and a lot of photographers need to design things too. Um, the problem is, like, ChatGPT, Image GPT, like, wow, what a great designer. But the problem is everything looks the same.
It really
Like,
does.
I can
Mhm.
see anything created in Image GPT. I'm like, "Oh, that's Image GPT." It's it's right there. So it's almost like they found this great designer, and this great designer designed everything for the whole world. And so the problem is it's lost its effectiveness because it might look beautiful, but everyone's, "Oh, that's Image GPT."
That's absolutely right.
So
It's like a
and I
trend
feel like
thing, you know?
yeah, but I almost feel like the way information travels today, a trend you could squeeze, 6 months, a year out of a trend. These days, you can get a week, 2 weeks, maybe a month,
Yeah. Yeah,
you'll
yeah.
slow people be like, "What, you've never seen that before?" And it's almost like once you've seen something, now the trend's over.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so
It's true.
things change so quickly, and with AI, so we're looking at Image GPT, we're looking, and then, of course, Gemini, I would say Gemini is probably the best at the moment. Um The most realistic, I would say, is Flex Context, although with the new, Adobe, their latest, Fill and Expand, not Fill that was the Image 3, Image 4, whatever it's called, that their latest one is actually really good. It's, which, I shouldn't be surprised, but, let's just be honest, we're about being honest. The Adobe image generation has been behind, since the days of Midjourney, right? Midjourney was
Mm.
kind of one everybody did, never kind of I don't even use Midjourney anymore, that's fallen behind. And Adobe was just so far behind, it was like, "Wow, these are the guys that are supposed to be the keepers of imagery, and the AI sucks." But now, the new one is really good. Their latest model is it can do the effects, it can do everything. It's as good as Gemini. It's as good as any of them now. Some things it does better. I think it does faces better than any other AI now. So, they've caught up. But my point on this is everything is progressing so quickly towards perfection, or, whatever AI thinks is perfection. It has a goal, it has one goal, and that is perfection, or what it thinks is perfection, of merging everything together that has ever been created by humanity and saying, here is the perfect product. And then the problem is everything is gonna look like that. Every AI is gonna be chasing that, and everything, so eventually everything is gonna be perfect. We're gonna live in a world where there's gonna be nothing, like, visually speaking, photography, photos, design, art, everything is gonna be the epitome of perfection.
Well, see,
And
that's
then people are gonna crave something different. And
and
that's when the resurgence or the renaissance of Photoshop, painting, people doing it manually is gonna come back, and there's gonna be a huge demand for it. It's gonna pay really well because no one's gonna be able to do it. So, that's where I'm kind of looking beyond where we are right now to where we're going is like, don't give up. Like, if you learn the art of being a great photographer, you learn the art of being great at Photoshop, you're gonna go through a little period, where things are gonna be rough. But I think in the long run, the quality is gonna rise. Craftsmanship, I think, will return. But the beautiful thing about artisans and craftsmen, or craftswomen, if that's a term, um, is that it's about you. It's unique. It's not something that can be mass produced, So it's something where you take pride in it. The person that buys it takes pride in it. Like, you go out and you buy that pair of shoes, you're not gonna be, wearing those every day. You're gonna be wearing when you go out, you're gonna really take care of those shoes. You're really gonna, value those shoes. It's gonna be different and not disposable. Like fast fashion is a term
Mm.
now that people are starting to rebel against. People are there's another term you might know it. I've got a friend that does clothing, and there's another term. It's the opposite of fast fashion, slow fashion or something. That's the new thing that people are actually starting to care about now. Because also you think about it like waste and pollution,
Oh,
like
yeah, huge.
you've got this
Yeah.
factory and it's just spitting things out, and then you've got the landfills full of shoes. That pair of Italian shoes that you're buying from, you know, you know, uh, you know, I can't even think of an Italian. Give me an Italian name. What's his name? Like
Francesco.
Francesco. Thank you.
Right.
So that pair of shoes, when they start to wear it, you're going to take them back. You're going to get them resold. You're going to get them
Yeah.
repaired. And there's gonna be people that are able to well, maybe he can fix them. It's a funny thing, I bought a pair of shoes when I was in Italy. I bought these boots, and the heel fell off, and I was like, "Oh, I'll just take it to a cobbler, here." And so I couldn't find anyone that could put a heel back on a
Yeah.
shoe.
D I'd say it's a really good example because I remember, I think the last time I went to Germany to see my mom, she took some shoes to have them resoled and have the heels repaired. And the first thought that came to my mind was like, "Why? Like, why would you do that? Just buy some new ones." And then I had to kind of, like, rewind myself and thinking like,
Mm,
"What am I saying? Like, why?" It's because it's as you say, so now we're just adding to landfill, and,
mm.
we're making the problem worse when really, we could just repair the same pair of shoes and still get a couple of years of life out of them, why not do that?
Uh,
Um,
and also they're not mass produced. You can't get the same shoes anywhere else.
exactly, yeah. Um, I wanna talk a little bit about, others of AI related issues. For example, how should photographers think about copyright, for example? Copyright, authenticity, disclosure. When AI generated elements become part of a photographic image. How should we treat that, and how should we think about that?
You know, that's that's we're in an interesting place now where I see someone will share an amazing photograph, and people say, "Oh, that's AI." So it's almost like it's not even, maybe that's the opposite of what you were saying there, where people have to disclose the AI, but now you have to prove it's not AI. I think is a bigger problem. To say, "No, I actually created this photo. I actually photographed this. I shot it." Maybe you retouched in Photoshop. But to say there's no AI used, is is even harder. I think, with content authenticity initiative, that Adobe and Canon, Nikon, like thousands of companies are involved in that now. Eventually, we will get to a point where imagery will be tagged. It may not be visually tagged, but you can check it, you can click on it, you can see if AI was used or not. But the onus is on the person to check to see if it is AI. I think obvious AI, people know as AI gets better, gets more realistic, it's going to be harder to tell, to a point where I'd say we're probably only a year or two away from an expert not being able to know what's
Mhm.
real and I mean, I'll be honest, sometimes I see some images. I can't tell if they're generated or real. It's rare, because right now you just see it and there's the AI look. Half the time we know what model was used because it has a look. Um, but yeah, I mean, in the future, I mean, I know if there's a law is going to be passed, it'll happen in Europe way before it happens in the US. As far as like having to disclose AI in magazines or whatever. Because I know Europe is way ahead of that already when it comes to retouching and, using Photoshop and stuff. US is the Wild West. It's
Yeah.
we don't really have to do a lot of disclose that much. I mean, there are certain things and things are changing. We are having to disclose more, but I think in the future, It probably will be, but, this is up to the lawmakers, you know, and they're never in a they don't seem like they're in a hurry to act or do anything.
Yeah.
Um, so, it's gonna be I think it's gonna be a while before we can really have that, where there's talk about the ethical side of it. There's, not just an art, there's the whole deep fake thing that people talk about, where something that didn't happen, you're representing it as it did. But
Yeah.
what actually I'm more concerned about is something that did happen and people were caught and then they can deny it saying it was AI. I'm actually more worried about that
Yeah.
than faking what didn't happen. Um,
It's also the amalgamation of the two, when you have something that actually happened, but then it's presented in a slightly different way. Like you could take an example, like, you'd have one country bomb another country, and then there's like, mobile phone footage of how it went the other way, and then there's like deniability and all the rest of it. When do you think you're looking at real evidence when it's sort of half true and half? I think that's the kind of the gray zone where it becomes really, really difficult to
yeah,
determine what's actually real and what isn't, especially with, the impact that AI has on video. Because up until fairly recently, there was a
yeah,
clear defining line. Images, stills images, well, okay, we don't know what we're looking at. But at least with video, it was like, well, it's video, so AI can't touch that. And now it can in an unbelievable way. And so sometimes I walk around and thinking like, I'm looking at things and I'm thinking, I don't know if that's real, the thing that I'm looking at, you know? That's just
yeah,
my head,
yeah.
you
Well,
know?
I mean, yeah, it's getting to that point where we can't trust. Remember they used to say camera never lies.
Yeah, well,
S-
that's
Camera
that's
still doesn't lie, but the person using it can.
it's like when they say guns don't shoot people, it's the people that shoot people. Well,
Yeah,
as Eddie
it's
Izzard
quite.
famously said, guns definitely help. You know, nobody's ever killed anybody by like walking around going, "Pang, pang, ping," you know?
Yeah.
One of these things. Now, Photoshop Cafe has survived, repeated changes in software platforms, algorithms, and
Mhm.
business models and so on. What has been the real key to that longevity?
It's the key is being, just constantly reinventing myself. And it's not that I necessarily make a conscious decision like, oh, I'm going to reinvent myself this week. But what I do is from time to time, I take a step back and I look at what I'm doing. And I'm like, okay, is what I'm doing, is this still relevant? What are people wanting to learn right now? Which is why, I'm teaching a lot more photography stuff and not as many how to create fake lightning and things like that anymore,
Mhm.
because that was what was relevant at that time. Um, so, which is also why I'm starting to incorporate AI into the training, um, not as a replacement, but as an addition and as a tool. So I think it's just being aware of as simple like, okay, if I was not me, or I was me in a different life, and I was wanting to take photos, or I was wanting to use Photoshop. Why? Why would I be using it? What would I be wanting to do? And how can I best teach that avatar of myself how to do this? So it's just being relevant. And, it's a conscious decision sometimes. Sometimes it's just natural. I get excited about something and I'm just doing it. And then it's like, oh, I'm doing this now. Like I could
Yeah,
probably create a course on being a social media influencer because I was a social media influencer before that term existed. But I never set out to be a social media
yeah,
influencer. And I'm not saying I'm gonna suddenly like, here's how to, do YouTube. But that's just an example of sometimes it's something, because I became very well known in drone photography because it was a area I just got into. Russell Brown, as you know, and worked with, back in the day, he asked me, he said, "Hey, would you like to teach a drone workshop with me?" And this is when drones were very new. And the reason he asked me is because I had some knowledge in video, and he wanted me to teach that side of it because his skill set at that time was not in video, it was in photography. And I was like, "Yeah, I'm sure. I don't have a drone, but I'm sure I can get one. I've got some connections, and I'll get a drone." He goes, "Okay, if you get a drone, I'll get you a GoPro camera." I'm like, "Okay." So, found a drone, he got me a camera, and that's how I started. And then just really fell in love with it and ended up writing books and doing courses and stuff on it and became very well known for drones. And then people are like, "Oh, you're so relevant. You're doing drones." And it's like, well, it was just something I found really interesting and I wanted to learn. And the funny thing is, sometimes when you don't know anything, it makes you a great teacher because you know those aha moments of like, "Oh, okay, this is what I needed to learn. This is what I need." Sometimes it's harder to do that, when you look at something you've been doing for years and years and years.
Yeah.
You're just like, "Where do I start?" Well, it's easy for drone. Where do I start? Well, I open a box and then I gotta put the propellers on. You know?
Yeah.
So, I'm using that, drones as an example because that is, very much related to photography, but a lot of photographers today know me as a drone photographer. That's what I'm known for. Um, and it wasn't because I was said, "Oh, I wanna be the drone guy." So it's kinda like maybe I'll be the AI guy. I'm not trying to be the AI guy. I'm just like, "Okay, this is what's new, this is what's exciting, and this is what I'm teaching?" And so I'm not really worried about the future of Photoshop Cafe. I think as long as I stay curious, as long as I'm creating for myself and not just creating for lessons, because there are people that I've gone to photography shows and I've been with photographers say, "Hey, look, we're gonna go out shooting." "Oh, no, I do this for a living. Why would I wanna go out shooting?" It's like, "Okay, got it." So there's some people who do it
Yeah.
because it's their job, and then there's some people who do it because they love it, and I'm doing it because I love it, and because of that, I'm staying relevant because I'm moving with what's new, what's exciting, what's intriguing me. It's just, I think that's the difference between learning something so I can teach it and learning something because I wanna do it.
But I think, from a communication point of view, that's so important because it's this thing, when you're really into something and you learn a new aspect of it, there's a real excitement there. I mean, and you,
Yeah.
you called it the aha moment. That's exactly it. You go, oh, I didn't know this is how it works. That's awesome. And then that excitement really translates when you're communicating that to others. When you're teaching that, it's just so much easier to be excited about it when you've just felt that excitement. Yeah, because when I teach, I mean, this is really the reason why I don't teach guitar anymore, which I did for decades. It's because I'm just not as excited about it
Mm.
as I was when I was 22. You know, and that's the truth. So that's why I don't teach guitar playing. I'm much more
Mm.
excited, teaching portrait lighting.
Mm.
Because that really excites me. It's like that's just when I get an image and it's like the lighting is just the way I want it to be. I'm like, yes, and it's like, that is
That is fun.
yeah, that's fun, that's the thing, exactly. So when
Yeah.
you look ahead to the next, let's say, 25 years, what do you believe will still matter regardless of what Photoshop, cameras or AI
Sure.
eventually become?
Mm. Great question. I have some thoughts on that. I think cameras are gonna change. Like, I don't think we're gonna be, you know, walking around with well, this is already old and obsolete, right? The DSLR, right? This
Mm,
thing is done. Now I'm using Sony mirrorless. I have been for years. I can't show it on camera because that's the camera I'm
yeah,
using, but I haven't used this camera in years. Um, but then we've got this, and there's a lot of technology in here that is not in that, $5,000, whatever it is, Sony camera. And that's because they've got this tiny little size, and I should be actually be holding up my Google Pixel phone because they're actually far ahead of Apple. Um, I used to be a Google ambassador. I'm not a Google ambassador anymore, so I'm not promoting them. Um, but they invented really computational photography, and what they're starting to put into the new Project Indigo in the Adobe camera app, where it's taking a series of photographs, it's looking at those photographs and then building a new photo out of that quick burst of photos. And that's how they can solve things like noise and sharpness, resolution, different things like that, zoom, and that's where Google was ahead of Apple. Apple's finally starting to catch up on the zoom. Like the cameras, you couldn't really tell much difference on the regular camera, but the pixels used to zoom really well. And that was because of the computational photography of taking those images, putting them together, and then doing that. So I feel like some of that hasn't really made its way into the other cameras. They're using AI for focusing and things like that. It also almost reminds me of Kodak. When Kodak decided, okay, well, we'll do a digital camera, but it's going to give you a digital viewfinder, but you still have to send film in to protect our business model. So it's so they're using AI, but not in a way that is going to keep them in business. I know it's controversial. I'm saying that, but we're talking in the far future. I don't think we're going to be carrying big lenses around with us. I think we're going to use optical lenses. I'd love to always have a nice optical lens, but there's no need to have this huge, long, heavy lens because they're gonna be able to use that same technology right now. Imagine if Apple or Google, I'm not Italian, but I do like to talk my hands. Um, Imagine if they decided to build a camera, like a real camera, like, a Canon or a Sony or a Nikon or an Olympus or, um, you know, a Fuji, right? And took that technology and reinvented the camera. Don't think about like what the cameras used to look like. Just say, okay, we're going to create a camera today with the technology we have that we've jammed into this little thing with these tiny little lenses. But now we're going to take the limits off. We're going to make it bigger because it's more comfortable to hold. And we're going to put a viewfinder in it because I don't like to shoot without a viewfinder. Like to me, a viewfinder is the thing I love about photography. I shoot with my phone. I don't enjoy it as much because when I go into that viewfinder and the rest of the world disappears, it's like I'm escaping into
Yeah.
this little cozy little room
Yeah.
and I'm in my
Exactly.
own little world and I'm seeing the world through my own tiny little world. And that's what I love about photography
That's
is
exactly.
the periphery on and you're there, right? So you still want that. You still want something comfortable in your hands, but it doesn't need to weigh a lot. It can have a battery that can last for weeks. It doesn't have heavy lenses. Like, I love going out and shooting, but I don't like carrying heavy lenses. I don't like carrying 20 lenses. Imagine if it's got one lens, it can go from 0 to 1,000x zoom and still look perfect. I think that's what we're gonna have. We're gonna have an endless dynamic range. We'll be shooting in floating point to 32-bit, so we don't have to worry about changing exposure. That's done. Exposure is a thing. Focus, maybe we'll focus it later. Maybe it'll shoot everything. And we can go maybe, we could have 2 types of camera. The one that we're looking through the viewfinder, doing that little thing. I think the future is also you just got a bowl, you throw it up in the air, takes a photo, you go back, go to your computer, and it's shot 360 degrees in HDR. So now you're composing your photo later, you're setting your exposure later, and you're deciding you just captured everything. And now you're just gonna and it's sort of at the beginning of that one, Insta360, with the X5 camera, it kind of does that when you can do reframing later. But, that's just gonna get better and better and better, whereas I don't think the camera is even gonna matter. Like, what camera even now, like, you shoot Sony, Canon, Nikon, Fuji. If you can't get a photo right now with any camera, you should just quit. because all the cameras are good enough already.
Yeah, exactly. That's it.
So that's kind of where I feel. So where is the skill going to come in there? The skill is going to become. I think it's going to become harder because one of the problems we have, and this is the problem maybe with AI too. You got every option is available, and true creativity doesn't come from options; it comes from limitations. And where you have that limitation is where you create something that's unique and wonderful. So we have to put our own limitations on it because the technology is not going to have the limit. Technology is going to allow us to do anything we want. And I don't think we're that far away from it. That's
Amen.
that's that's my prediction. What do you think?
I completely agree with you. It's actually everything you've just said. I've mentioned so many times on this podcast. Limitations are really the key. Honestly, it's like limitations are the absolute key to getting better and improving. No matter what creative category, or discipline you pursue. Actually, same thing is true in music. Exactly the same thing. Um,
Mm.
there are X amount of an infinite number of scales available to you. You get to start by using one and understand that one. And that's the limitation. For example, and even within the scale, you start with learn how to use two notes or three notes, across one or two strings on your guitar, and then expand from that. And it's exactly the same thing. You limit yourself in order to gain deeper understanding, and you work outwards from there. That's the thing. Now, Colin, we'll always finish off an episode. I say always, most of the time, we finish it off with a quick fire round. Okay,
Okay.
so we've got six
All right.
questions. You ready?
I'm ready.
Cool. Okay, what is the most underrated tool in Photoshop?
Wow. And that's supposed to be a quick, easy one, huh? The most underrated tool in Photoshop. Um, Boy, that's really hard. Um, I'm gonna say shadow highlight.
Okay, cool. Um, one Photoshop feature you would happily retire.
Oh, one Photoshop feature I would happily retire. A lot of the filters.
Yeah, cool. That was work. Um, what is the keyboard shortcut you could not work without?
The keyboard shortcut I could not work without. Oh, geez, I probably have two of them. If the space bar is considered keyboard shortcut, for moving things around,
Yeah,
but otherwise it'd be Command T, Control T, for free transform. Yeah,
yeah, absolutely. Um, okay, one editing task you still prefer to do manually.
dodging and burning. I don't
Yeah,
even have to think about that.
yeah,
I just love dodging and burning.
yeah, same. Which older version of Photoshop would you revisit for one day?
Version 3, layers were first invented.
Oh, cool. Uh, okay, complete this sentence. Photoshop still matters because
Mm, 'cause people wanna do things themselves.
perfect answer. Colin, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. I know we could talk Photoshop for hours and hours and hours more. And I'm pretty sure we'll come back to that and continue this conversation in a separate episode. But it was an absolute pleasure having you on the show. So thank you for being the guest on this week's Camera Check podcast.
And thanks for having me. It's been fun. I've enjoyed our conversation. You've asked some really great questions, and I've enjoyed our chat. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Okay, folks, that is it for today. I think the biggest takeaway from today's conversation is that although the tools will continue to change, the fundamentals of creativity, visual judgment, curiosity, and knowing why you are making an image remain just as important as ever. You'll find links to Colin's work, Photoshop Cafe, tutorials, courses, and the YouTube channel in the description below, of course. And I'd love to hear what you think. Which Photoshop skill do you believe still matters most? Has artificial intelligence improved your creative process, or Are you concerned that photographers are becoming too dependent on automation? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this episode, you might also enjoy my conversation with Jefferson Graham about smartphones, AI, and the future of photography. You'll find that episode on the Camera Shake YouTube channel and wherever you normally listen to the podcast. You can help support the show at buymeacoffee.com/CameraShake. And of course, you can find Camera Shake t-shirts, hoodies, mugs, and more in the merchandise store. You can also join the Camera Shake mailing list, again, over at CameraShakePodcast.com. You can receive updates about upcoming episodes, guests, and everything happening behind the scenes. So if you're watching this on YouTube, please give the video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss future episodes. And wherever you're listening, please consider sharing the episode with another photographer who might enjoy it just as much. A new episode of the Camera Shake podcast, of course, drops every Thursday. Until then, keep shaking things up in the world of photography, and I'll see you next Thursday.